One.
We can't do anything.
My brother-in-law took me to the Coliseum.
Okay.
Raiders and the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was awesome. It was so much fun.
So I'll call the City of Beaumont City Council meeting workshop session. It's 6:02 p.m. Call to order, please.
Councilmember White. Here. Councilmember Lara.
Here.
Councilmember Carroll.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Santos.
Here.
Mayor Martinez.
Here. And I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, if we could. Mayor Pro Tem, would you lead us, please?
Pledge allegiance. Start.
Pledge allegiance to
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Oh, you were waiting for the audience to jump in. Saying that.
I know it is. Okay.
Okay.
Not the cue cards, huh?
Yeah, I don't really. Do we have any public comment today?
No, sir.
Okay, and with that, bring it on.
Okay. So we do have Mr. Hart with us this evening that has put together an amazing presentation to kind of walk through. The objective is really kind of orient us on our pavement management program, the traffic study that we did, or the roadway study that we did, and then the strategies that we're looking for in terms of implementing the program that's there. But the one setup thing I'll put out to you this evening that really will kind of come back around to the back end, and that is this is all about balance. It's about what amount of resources do we have available to put towards programming, and then what kind of resources or what kind of program objectives do you really have? And so we've got some discussion towards the end of the presentation with regard to drilling into some of those discussion points. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Hart to take us through an amazing presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council. Yes, welcome to the Road and Rehabilitation Program discussion. So first off, a little bit of background. The city owns and manages about 132 centerline miles of road, which is just lineal feet of roadway miles, which equates in our city to about 282 lane miles. Lane miles is just simply the amount of centerline miles you have times the amount of lanes within that roadway. We are seeking feedback regarding the best use of available funds and the prioritization of road maintenance projects moving forward. In 2017, the city did engage a consultant to provide a pavement management report of arterial, collector, and residential local streets. The deliverable for this was the pavement management report. The report assessed a numerical value of each street, PCI, otherwise known as the Pavement Condition Index, from 0 to 100, 0 being a failed street and 100 being a brand new street. So road expectations, what are our expectations? So typically they're for a smooth traveled surface, they're safe, they're convenient, and more these days they're multimodal, meaning that they're not just for vehicular traffic, but they're encompassing walkability, bicycling, public transit, several items. So how are roads used? This is a pretty good graphic here because I don't think we realize how much is going on underneath the streets. You know, there's not only local utilities as well, but there's a plethora of dry utilities for gas, electric, communications, fiber anymore. And as far as wets go, we have storm sewer, sanitary sewer, potable water, and most likely recycled water in the future. And there's some restrictions on that, and they can really crowd our utility corridors. Department of Public Health has some strict separation requirements, which can further congest dry utilities into a much more localized location. So there are some inherent challenges with that. So this is just a graphic of our road network. Lane miles we've gone over, and this just represents, you know, how many of what we have in the city. So we have a little over 161 lane miles of residential streets, 57 miles of collectors, and about 63 miles of arterials. That also equates to, in terms of road segments, and road segments are simply the segments of road that are typically bound by an intersecting street on either side. So as far as the analysis for the pavement management, when they identified based on each road segment, and that's how they're quantified in the tabular support for that PCI report. But we end up with about 583 residential segments, 55 arterial, and 76 collector. So which is which? So the arterials, from major arterials, would be streets like Highland Springs, Beaumont Avenue, 6th Street would be an arterial, Oak Valley is an arterial. And they're high-capacity roads that typically connect collectors to interstate freeways. They would have an ADT, an average daily traffic, of anywhere from 15,000 to 50,000. On the next step down would be the collectors, which would generally collect and provide connectivity to arterials to local streets. Those roughly have an ADT of about 5,000 to 15,000. And then lastly, we have residential local streets, which are obviously serve all the neighbors that we have and can serve anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 daily trips. So here's just a graphic for a typical pavement section. They generally include just an asphalt surface, an aggregate base, and then they're normally, and I would say 90+% of the streets we have, probably more than that, they're on a compacted subgrade. In certain instances where there's, extreme truck traffic or there's concern underlying soils, things like that, you may implement a sub-base course in between the base and the subgrade itself. Referring back to the PCI report that we did, and it's pretty much industry standard, they identified 8 different distress types, which is consistent with ASTM standard, and then they rated those on terms of severity from low, medium, and heavy. Those distress types are alligator cracking, block cracking, distortion, transverse cracking, patching and utility cuts, rutting and depression, weathering, and raveling. And we'll go into each one of those in a little bit more detail. So the first is alligator cracking. And it's labeled because it looks like a reptile scale similar to the alligator's back. It typically will start with longitudinal cracking parallel to the center line, and then the induction of transverse cracking will create this web look. Left unchecked, it becomes real problematic. It allows water to seep through, and if it's left unchecked long enough, then it gets into the foundation and can lead to a complete remediation. It's a typical great indication that the street is failing. If caught early on, some streets may be susceptible to a slurry seal in order to minimize it. It may not be the best case of action, but it can certainly prolong the life of that street. But generally, if the cracking remains within only a few inches deep, we would recommend the street for a mill and overlay of about 2.5 inches. And in moderate to more severe conditions, we would be looking at a full rehab, which would be a new base course and a new paved surface. Block cracking is just as it sounds. You can see the rectangular shaped cracks that have instilled here. It's typically caused by the shrinkage of the asphalt and the daily temperature cycling. We don't have a ton of that here, but it does occur. It's not associated with load or the traffic itself. And the preventable measures ensure in proper compaction, specifically in the base courses. If you are susceptible to high temperature differentials and poor compaction in the base courses, you can see block cracking. The recommended treatment for these would be if the cracks themselves are less than a half inch, we would look for crack sealing those. If they're larger, we would look at a grind and overlay milled surface. Distortion. Distortion is caused by the instability of the asphalt mix and then the weakness of the base and underlying subgrade layers. The typical distresses include rutting, shoving, which is the graphic here is a pretty clear case of shoving, depressions and swelling and patch failures. This is routinely seen at, you'll see like at arterial intersections where there's heavy truck traffic, and when it gets really warm, you'll see it. Overweight vehicles, sudden stopping will really have an impact on this. It's really to the warmer climates is really a problem. A lot of the desert communities, you'll see that they will actually concrete their intersections, and not only will they concrete their intersections, they'll concrete maybe 200 to 300 feet either side to minimize this. Concrete is one means of R&R. There are some utility concerns that come with that and the accessibility, long term, but it is definitely one way of proceeding. Depending on, how severe it is, we would look for localized spot repair, if possible. If it's minor pushing and shoving, maybe an inch and a half to 2 inches, something like that, we could look for a mill and overlay. And if it's just prevalent throughout the whole intersection, it would be a complete R&R. either with all new asphalt surface, or I think at that time we would assess whether concrete would be a vulnerable means of proceeding. Patching utility cuts. This is obviously a big problem in any city. So this is caused by obviously both new construction and new services required, but obviously the maintenance of existing facilities and replacement of utilities that underground. It's imperative, at least from a city perspective, in our inspections that we oversee, and that proper trench construction standards are followed. A lot of times we'll see the settling of these when they failure to follow like a T-cut, we call it, trench, where it actually will minimize the subsidence that you will see there. Depending on the amount, a lot of times this would be susceptible for a mill and overlay. Some of the things that we're looking at least as staff are doing to minimize the prevalence of this moving forward, is installation of a pavement moratorium on newly paved streets for 3 to 5 years, a update to our city specifications and our trench standard repair. I think both those things combined will make a big difference in minimizing this occurrence. Longitudinal cracking, or just as they sound, they're cracks that are parallel to the pavement center line. They don't turn into to alligator cracking per se. They're usually a result of fatigue and or poor joint construction. Treatments will usually include a crack seal and slurry for minor cracking and a mill and overlay for somewhat more moderate. In some instances, these may be, they may benefit from the installation of a geosynthetic grid, which would be done in the actual mill and overlay process. It would be on top of the mill and under the overlay, which will help some of those cracks from reoccurring in the future. Rutting and depression. Similar to distortion, though it's usually over a longer segment. It usually, a telltale sign of this is that you see like a wheel-defined pattern in the asphalt itself, and it over a much longer duration. It's usually a result of poor compaction and improper temperature during placement, as they don't get it hot enough when they're placing it, and they don't achieve the compaction that they need to. And then when it does get hot on harder days, it does tend to shove and push to the side. Smaller deviations for this longer rutting, they can benefit by utilizing slurry as somewhat of a leveling course to help extend their life. For low severity to medium, we would look probably more towards a mill and overlay, and for moderate to heavy severity, we would look at complete reconstruction, base course and pavement. Here you see weathering, and this is just traditional wear. So as time goes on and the pavement ages and hardens, as the binder and the aggregate itself begin to wear away, and you can see that the aggregate's exposed and a lot of the fines are gone. If it's left unmaintained, then it will begin to unravel, moisture will begin to get in, and it will deteriorate rapidly. Typical treatment, if caught early enough, a slurry seal is actually fairly effective for the lower severity weathering. If left unchecked a little bit longer, then a mill and overlay would most likely be recommended. The pavement management program. So the pavement management plan is designed to provide a better understanding of the city's pavement condition and develop comprehensive pavement management strategies for future maintenance. So some of the goals of the pavement management program that was undertaken was to develop an inventory. So as previously stated, they did a complete citywide inventory and analysis of every single city street that was in place at the time. Collecting consistent, complete, and accurate pavement condition data, which entailed full on-field surveys, measurements of each street segment, the monitoring of the existing network, and then there's some benefits that come out of that. It allows staff to prioritize and schedule future maintenance road projects utilized in capital improvement projects. It provides the budget needs in order to achieve a certain maintenance goal or a preferred network pavement condition index. And it predicts some of the future conditions and costs associated with instilling the program.
Mayor, may I ask a quick question?
Yeah, workshop, we can jump in.
Okay, so before we go back, I just had one question on your descriptions of all the different types of disrepair. You mentioned a future remedy was a pavement moratorium on newly surfaced streets. What do you mean by that?
We would look to present an ordinance in which that any newly paved or surfaced streets, as we would not allow new utility construction for a period of 3 to 5 years.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Unless say directional.
Yes. Yeah,
So-
they directional or avoid the
Yeah, they
service.
would have some options. Obviously, they're the more expensive options, but you wouldn't have the cuts in the pavement. You would do a directional drill. They would pre-plan it. If they did it and they needed to open cut, you could require a full mill and grind
Right.
overlay of the pavement section. Obviously, again, more expensive for the utility, but it preserves the life of your street.
Got it.
And that includes us as well.
Yes.
So we would
Right.
follow the moratorium. as
Okay.
well, our own practice.
So just to clarify for council, since the workshop, if we have a quick question on the slide, so we don't wait until the very end, we can ask it now.
Oh, okay.
And then the bigger questions we'll do at the end, and so forth. So, Councilmember Carroll?
When you did the slide on longitudinal cracking, there's grind and overlay and mill and overlay. What's the difference between the two?
They're the same, they're interchangeable,
They're
and I
the
could have,
same.
but they
Okay,
are
thanks.
interchangeable terms, yes.
Trying to figure out
Yeah.
what the difference
That
is.
was my question. Good for you. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
PCI stand for? I didn't catch that at the beginning.
Pavement Condition Index,
Thank you.
Okay, continue.
so a little more on the pavement management. Yeah, in the long run, pavement management saves more money than it costs. You know, it's a guide for preventative maintenance, and it recognizes in reality avoiding deteriorated sections that require expensive rehabilitation, potentially with little benefit. It identifies larger sections for maintenance and rehabilitation and long-term budget planning. You can kind of see it's broken down here into 4 categories. So we would generally state that in a range of 70, 100 would be considered good to excellent. Obviously, 100 would be a new surface. 70 is on the lower side of that. But preventative maintenance can, you know, would include some crack sealing if required, and a slurry seal would help extend the life of those streets significantly and prevent us from getting to a more costly repair. The second range there would be at risk to fair, so that would be about at a 50 to 70 PCI. Generally speaking, these streets would be susceptible for like a mill and overlay, probably with some spot, you know, treatments for base repair if there's some more prevalent failures, but not a complete reconstruct. The third would be poor at a average PC or a PCI range of 25 to 50. Still, you know, viable for mill and overlay, probably more spot base treatment replacements, maybe some larger areas of a complete R&R, and then anything less than 25 is, you know, is failing and or has failed when we're at 0, and that's obviously just a complete reconstruct. And it's failed to the extent that it's going to fail. So there's, from a financial perspective, there's not a whole lot of benefit. But there are in the lower range for these now. There, you know, even if they were due for a significant rehabilitation, there still is a benefit from an aesthetic perspective and even a rideability perspective to slurring these streets and or minor overlays is something that we can look at. It's not going to be a permanent remedy. It can buy you some time, but there is some potential benefit in instilling those if desired. I would definitely look at those on an as-needed or a case-by-case basis, but there are certain limited circumstances where that could be beneficial.
Okay, so when you look at the pavement condition index, and I like the way that you haven't broke it down, but are any of those numbers in that index will determine whether or not you need to core a road to make sure you know that what the sub-base or base is?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, so these would equate to the recommended treatment method, and anything that we would reconstruct, we would look to, we would be coring those. So, for instance, we brought the
Okay.
Michael Baker contract, and we're now underway for a portion of Beaumont Ave to be completely rehabbed. So they went out and they cored samples, and we should have that report here actually any day. So in those instances, yes. You know, it wouldn't surprise me based on, you know, the limited as-built that we have and some of the conditions we found not only there but Oak Valley itself is if base doesn't even exist. I mean, we've gotten into situations where it's very slim, thin amounts of paving and it's right on native soil. And so, I mean, it's no wonder why they're wearing, you know, in the way that they are.
So can you use geotechnical or geogrids to help offset that, or do you just have to go in, take out and then redo?
Yeah, if it's gone far enough, it's putting a Band-Aid on essentially, and it's somewhat of a
Okay.
costly Band-Aid, because if the subgrade and the section has failed, then it's gonna shine right back through, regardless of even if you have a geograde. It's going to be more uniform in the way that it fails and settles, but it's still gonna fail.
Okay. Thank you.
Jeff, how does the time of year and the weather factor into this program? Because that's got to be a factor in how much work you can get done based on the conditions and what section of the street, how long you can do, and sort of a lot of factors I don't know about.
It certainly has played a condition in why they're in the shape that they're in. Last year was obviously an extreme amount of rain that we have, but generally we're not limited as far as pavement projects, as far as the time of year. And we're able to work around those. Now, we may be, unable to work certain days due to rain, but we're generally, capable of working most time around the year. In real cold temperatures, it's a little bit harder to get the asphalt to a temperature you want to get the proper compaction. So they may, in the spec, we may write something, that we need an ambient temperature higher than 60. So there could be some delays there. But generally speaking, there's not usually a whole lot of downtime in how we approach the construction. So the program that was, the analysis is done and is pretty much as industry standard is ASTM 6433, and that's the pavement condition index was all based on. Now, there's other programs that are kind of a one-off on that. They have their own algorithms that take in other factors into account. The one that the city elected to use at the time was called MTC Pavement Management, and it was better known as Street Saver. But the inspections, they entailed assessing all the pavement distresses, the 8 pavement distresses we talked about earlier, and then also their severity levels, anywhere from low, medium to heavy. The analysis was done using handheld mobile radar technology, so they log data based on the frequency of the cracks, the width of the cracks, prevalency, and then they measure those. They have a digital measuring wheel, and they measure all those. They go back and then they load the data pretty much on a daily basis. These programs, as things change, we get new streets, as hopefully we're doing more and more maintenance here, ramping up, they really should be, reassessed every 5 years in order to kind of get a baseline and kind of refocus and regather and move forward. And there's a significant benefit to having, routine, up-to-date modeling of our streets. So the current PCI, so on based on the report, the city's overall PCI is 71, which is good. There are some things that play into that, and one of the main things is the majority of the streets that we have within Beaumont are residential streets, and a lot of the residential streets we have are new. So they are skewing some of the numbers up a little bit, because where the streets are good, they've been good, for a while now, but where they're bad, they can be really bad. And so there's kind of two extremes happening, throughout the city. We've got a lot of the newer ones that are in a, considered a good condition, 70 plus, a lot of them even 80 plus. And then obviously in some more prevalent to the downtown and industrial areas, things like that, is we've got some significant failures. The collector average is down a little bit to 65. The residential is a little bit higher at 73, and then the arterial is pretty much right on it at 70. So, about 75% of our streets fall in the good range right now. And depending on how long we do or deflect, future maintenance is how long we may stay with that range. 10% fall in the at risk to fair, which is a 50 to 70, 7.5 in the poor, and then a little less than 8% in the failed. So here's, hopefully it's somewhat visible, but here's a pretty good graphic that shows essentially what I was just stating before, is that if you look at the outlying residential areas, you can see it's pretty much solid green, and they all have a PCI of 70 or before. And if you look more at the central downtown areas, you can see, everything ranging from failed, poor, to at risk or fair. So a couple of things we're noting on here is that some of this map will get a little bit better. So we're working on the Beaumont Ave R&R reconstruction. So we'd like to see, in a few years, that entire segment that you see there now be green. Cherry has just recently, there's been some plans approved from a party to have that done. So soon they will be undertaking an upgrade to Cherry from Cougar to Brookside. The developer's on the hook for Highland Springs as well, so that will be developer funded. There's some recent segments that the city has actually done that could be reflected on here. So Oak Valley Parkway from Beaumont Avenue to Cherry has now been upgraded with the grind and overlay, so that segment would be green. Xenia was a complete R&R, and 8th Street was a complete R&R. So as we look at the maintenance cycle on these, and we talk about, and Todd will talk a little bit more about this too, but we talk about, a 10 to 15 year life on some of these, is a lot of the streets that are in the green are going to start pushing that pretty soon. And if we don't start becoming more proactive in our road maintenance program, a lot of these streets that you see in green are going to move to purple. A lot of the ones you see in purple are going to move to yellow, and it's just going to trickle down, and the backlog is just going to become higher and higher and insurmountable.
And before you leave this page, the section, I recognize that you don't have streets, say for Solera and Four Seasons, because those aren't city seats. The gap on Brookside Avenue that would have been in front of Solera, is that a gap because it's a county street or because it's a city? I mean, a Solera. I would imagine it's.
They're county. Brookside would be city where it was fronted, so those would be county areas.
So that area that is broken off, that you don't have Brookside going all the way through, because I'm assuming that, we were just talking about earlier, the north side is county, the south side is city.
Right.
And you have that whole section off, not there.
And
Right.
that probably needs to be updated, and just to remind the council, we did do a slurry seal project on that area as well.
Okay.
So we went in half with the county.
Yeah.
And did our portion of slurry seal, they did their portion.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's why even portions as you go east, like between Cherry and Shane, where we were recently talking about the bike route itself, that's actually county, all in the county. It's not center line. It jogs. It doesn't necessarily follow, Cherry, the center line of Brookside to a T. It kind of jogs in and out.
So is that, so that open area is one of those as well then, you think?
Yeah, I was going to see if I could pull this.
Because I know when you get further east on Brookside, I understand what you're talking about there, where it goes.
We need to update this map, like most of North Sundance is missing as well.
Yeah, where Brookside ends on the west side, that's where it hits I-10.
Right.
And then where it stops,
Right.
going back east, that's county.
Right, and the gap there that's in between, kind of the way Solera has two prongs that go up in the middle of there, that's entirely within the county.
That
road.
is all county. Okay.
Yes.
And that portion of Cherry Valley is in front of the high school, so that is city then, that little section? Okay.
Yes.
But on the other side is the county also, across the high school, that's county.
On the other side of
Oh,
Cherry Valley?
Cherry Valley, yes.
Yeah, I think when it was annexed by the high school, so to the center line of Cherry Valley,
Yeah.
south,
Mhm.
high school is city, and then county to the north.
Mhm.
Okay.
So next is kind of what repair techniques are we going to employ, and we've already talked about some of these, but a couple of things that we've, and you've seen before as well, is so we have purchased and we are now using a crack seal machine. I think that we are trying to maximize that and leverage that to our benefit for the slurry seal streets that we are undertaking is the city street crews are diligently working on getting those crack sealed, and the plan would be that any crack seal remediation that needs to happen in those segments that are to be done slurry seal by a contractor would be done, the crack seal portions would be done by city staff. And so we are hopeful to bid the contract for slurry seal, mill and overlay streets, and Beaumont reconstruction mid-fall. And so we still have a few months, but I think that we can knock most of those streets out with city staff, and it'll yield a much better product and longevity for those streets that are susceptible to slurry seal. We also have an asphalt patch truck that was purchased last year, I believe, and so a lot of the spot repairs and load repairs that need to be done, we can also do those as a city. So our streets crew is definitely ramped up in size, and they are able to do more and more significant projects. Some things that we may look forward also is, that we haven't used as much and is potentially an alternative means, but it's a fog seal and chip seal. Chip seal may be a good approach for some of for extending the life of streets like Oak Valley, maybe, where they're lower west side, where they're a little bit more remote and desolate, and I think it can lead to a good 5 to 8 year extension on the life of those. Typically, you would lay a chip seal, and then you would either micro seal or slurry seal on top of that. Slurry seal is obviously, we've talked about as part of the bid package streets that we're undertaking, mill and overlay, recent projects as we discussed with Oak Valley, and then a full pavement reconstruction. So as far as benefits for crack sealing, it reduces the rate of deterioration and it prevents water infiltration. So that's one of the main things, and probably the main thing will kill and unravel asphalt is a standing and accumulation of water. And if it gets through the asphalt and gets into the subgrade, then we look at much more costly repairs. So being able to crack seal these and prevent the intrusion from the lower layers of the pavement itself or into the base or subgrade is very key. It keeps it, like I said, the loose material attached, and it's typically used on non-active cracks. We have where there still may be some cracking occur. We have done in those instances, but there may be another effort needed to go back out and do some minor repairs on those. The average cost for those is about 25 cents per yard, and so the useful life is about 2 to 4 years, which can be extended obviously when we crack seal these and then we come through with a slurry seal pretty near after. Asphalt patching, definitely for more spot repairs, but it reduces the rate of deterioration. It's a simple fix for problems like potholes, but it's not just potholes, for utility patches and cuts and trenches like that. It's also a good option. It's for localized problem repairs, and sometimes it can be used or will be used before the installation of new surfaces. Usually about a 2 to 4 year life and about $25 per square yard, and it can be done in-house. Slurry seal is just as it sounds. It's a real thin pavement surface mixture. It's just applied over an existing surface. There is some prep that needs to happen prior, but it's pretty straightforward process, relatively inexpensive. It binds most of those loose surface materials that you may get for some weathering, improves friction, and to be as effective as possible, it should have little to no cracking. About a 5 to 7 year extension of life there. And here's a term that we'll introduce, I think that Todd will hit a little more on, is it's about $35,000 a lane mile, and that comes into play when we start looking at how do we want to tackle this, citywide as our rehabilitation approach. Sorry, I skipped one. Mill and overlay, it gives you a complete new wear surface. So usually you would mill about 2/10, which is about 2.5 inches, clean the surface, put a tack coat, and put a brand new paved surface on there. So long as there's no cracking that's full depth or is reaching into the base itself, you can routinely get an additional 10 to 15 year life out of the streets. The cost for that is about $110,000 per lane mile. And then last, we have the reconstruction, which includes, this is kind of a last resort, but it's a full depth rehab. So we would look at removal of any existing base, removal of the pavement layer, and then recompaction of the existing subgrade. If the subgrade is what led to the failure in the first place, we may look at over-Xing the existing subgrade 12 to 18 inches, all further reasons to have the geotechnical analysis to make proper recommendations in moving forward. But it's a complete replacement of the street. And that is about $500,000 lane mile. It's hard to quantify because it's not a set thickness that we're doing, and it's going to be contingent on the recommendations from the structural. So you may have one street that calls for 6 inches of base with 3 inches of asphalt, and you may have another one that calls for 8 inches of base and 6 inches of asphalt. I mean, so you could have two vastly different sections, but as a rough rule moving forward, it's about $500,000 per lane mile.
And you have some streets that would be, off the top of your head, that would need full reconstruction at this point?
Beaumont is the main one that comes right as of right now. There are others, but Beaumont would be the main. And Xenia, we recently did. 8th Street was a complete reconstruction. So those are some recent ones that were done, and then Beaumont's the one that's planned right now. It is, the bang for the buck is, is a little bit harder. There are streets that definitely warrant it, but it is very costly.
And that picture, is that?
That's 8th.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and if you go back to your slide number 20 and look at
Right.
anything that's in red, that is a
Right.
full reconstruction. I think
Okay.
where you're going to get the difference in the base and the asphalt will be type of street. So anywhere that we're running heavy traffic, 4th Street's a great example. 4th Street is heavy traffic now that we have all the industry versus a
Right.
residential street.
Okay.
And so that's gonna call for a different pavement than, pavement and base than, say, a residential street might.
So, quick question. So for slide 21, when you outline the projects under the bid package, those are possible projects, but they don't include all projects, correct?
No, they do not include all the streets, so.
But I mean, well, let me rephrase. It doesn't have all of them that we're planning on at this time? Or is that all we're planning on in that bid package?
Yeah, in that bid package, as far as what we're gonna do this fiscal year,
That's
we'll
what-
have all that and probably some additional. So until we get those in, and we will bid it in a fashion so that we can maximize the available funds that we have. But it's inclusive of several streets susceptible for slurry seal, some for grind and overlay, and then Beaumont Avenue itself. We also went to get approval to do the design for all of Beaumont so we can more accurately plan for future year expenditures, knowing that we will only be able to construct a portion of the Beaumont Avenue this year, and we're gonna have to kick some of the future construction to future years.
And for 22, 23, when you talk in-house, do we have the proper training now? Do we have additional training needed for our personnel?
No, I think we're,
Do you think we're well-trained?
Yeah.
Good, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how about the equipment? And I'm not talking about additional, but I'm talking about the equipment we have. Good? All right, that's what I want.
That's actually a picture of your stuff right there.
Yeah, I know, but I just want to make sure there's something else that could be, you know, an additional that we don't know of, that we want them to be able to have everything they need to do it right, so.
On slide 21, that's kind of essentially all your tools in the
Okay,
toolbox.
and we have
Anything
them.
and everything that you could do from a street perspective. Some of these, you obviously probably would not want to do a chip seal in the middle of a residential. Chip seal comes with its own set of cons. It's noisy. It doesn't have maybe as long of a wearing surface as, say, your grind and overlay. And so, you know, we're gonna try to pick and bring to you the best application we believe for the least amount of money to get you the longest longevity.
And you said that on Beaumont, you're gonna keep in mind what we can do in the future. What are you looking what part of Beaumont to do first?
well, from well, like I said, we're having the whole part designed, so
Right.
we need to see where the engineer's estimate, probably before we plan some of that. Like between 5th and 6th is like to be an entire reconstruction. Not all of Beaumont is in need of a complete reconstruction. So there are portions that are only in need of just a mill and overlay. But for the reconstructions, it's 5th and 6th and,
So that's like in front of McDonald's and
yes,
Baker's and.
yes.
Okay.
And there's another segment too. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But there's two segments we were hoping to get done now, but like I say, the cost, especially due to the width of the street itself, is going to be so extensive. Because if you look at lane miles, so, you know, if you're looking at a 1 lane mile, so to speak, in your 4 lane, that's really only a quarter mile as the crows flies. And so you're paying for not you're paying for the buck, but the amount that you can do is significantly reduced due to the overall width of the road.
Okay.
And of course, I hear every day the one right Beaumont Avenue going up to the high school. So that's coming up later in our discussions, because that Beaumont Avenue is pretty big, of course. So we're doing the section down here south. We're going to talk later about where that northern part fits, or,
As far as resurfacing or widening?
well, with Beaumont Avenue went all the way up in the map towards towards Brookside, which is right where the high school is.
Yeah, so that's not a complete rehab. There's portions of that they need a grind overlay, and there's portions of that actually I think would see benefit from just a slurry seal.
Now, on that note, there were a few people that brought up some questions at the State of the City with the community, where they were talking about the area around that high school on Beaumont Avenue. When we talk about redoing the streets, are we also thinking about whether there's going to be any type of changes to that street? Or, I mean, because I'd hate to have to, you know, slurry it and stuff and then tear it up again. So,
Yeah, so I mean, we're as far as right now, we're limited pretty much to the use of the funds that from what we can do, and so it's not for expansion or widening projects, but solely
Right,
for resurfacing. I'm not aware of any, you know,
yeah, I
future to
didn't.
widen those sections, yeah.
Plan for that, but, okay.
Let me follow up on that, on that street in there. You know, Brookside to Cougar Way in there, on that street on Beaumont Avenue. And if we're gonna, you know, do the road in there, we don't have even a drainage system in there. We don't have any, you know, gutters in there. And I'm just concerned that we're gonna be wasting our investment on that side if we don't, put our own first, the gutters and the drainage in there. Every rainy season in there, it flood on that section. That's the thing on that side. Even though we put it on the, put it on top on everything in there, every year, the asphalt in there, it peeled off. Check that out, I mean, on that side, especially on Brookside and Beaumont Avenue.
Yeah, I think where it's flooding is it's backing up at Brookside at Cherry, coming down the Brookside.
That's correct.
Area. And so you're right, we typically close that street off for the county. It's not really flowing over the street, so I don't know that it's necessarily a drainage issue there. But we have submitted, and we've been working with the county on long-range drainage that would include that area.
Because in front of the, the sports park in there, if you look in there, there's always a lot of holes and everything in there.
You're talking on Beaumont Avenue, not on Brookside.
Not on Brookside. I mean, Beaumont Avenue.
In front of the sports park.
Between the Brookside and
Oak Valley.
Cougar
Or
Way.
Cougar.
Yeah.
And then we don't have any drainage system in there.
Right, so like I said, we're as far as the funding we have, we're very limited. What we can do, when we look at these things moving forward, especially for streets that are either a mill and overlay or reconstruct themselves, is making sure that they have proper cross drainage, and so that we're not creating a flat surface in something where ponding may exist, and so that we've got positive drainage from the center to the edge of the road. If there's some mining, grading enhancements or things we need to do to keep the water away from the road, we'll do the best we can within the funds that we have.
Nice to hear that.
But I'll tell you, on drainage though, it's a slippery slope because what may be a spot repair may require significant downstream improvements. So you could be talking millions of dollars to chase drainage from the low all the way up through. So in some of those cases, we may be doing some things at a particular spot to help address some of that. But there may be some lower level maintenance things that you do to kind of help at least keep a safe drive course, wear course there for people, knowing that you're going to have to redo it maybe every 2 to 3 years. There's just going to be spots like that until you can get a significant capital improvement done that is a permanent fix for some of those things.
Probably all we could do is do an elevation on some section in there, so that will avoid the flow of the water on that side, or stagnancy of the water on that side.
So when you say you're doing a street design overview of the city, you're looking at all of it, the traffic patterns, the quality, the future demand, elevation, the drainage. I don't know what that encompasses. So that's why I'm sort of asking about the drainage. Is that a part of it?
No, it's not routinely. And I said we would take advantage of opportunities to be able to assess any known conditions or look at them as we move forward. So, if we're talking traffic or drainage, they're generally not a part of the road maintenance program itself. Especially on the full reconstruct streets, there are some minor things that we can do in order to facilitate or make those situations better. When we look at slurry seal and mill and overlay or certain spot treatments, there's little that's in the toolbox to be able to address some of those concerns.
Where does Pennsylvania Avenue fit into this plan?
From
First Street all the way up.
So, it's identified in the network. If we're looking at it, are we looking at, as far as the ultimate widening of Pennsylvania? It would not be a part of this plan.
Just making the road better, improving the condition of the road there. Or is it in a grander plan of when they make an intersection there for the interstate? I just looking to see when the priority was. There's 3,000 or 4,000 residents that live on the other side of that there, and that's their main artery through.
Right. It would be, prioritized, at least from a service in the way that we would for the rest of the city. We would look at the condition index of that street, what's the best bang for the buck as far as, preventative maintenance, long-term, what kind of shape it is in now. It would definitely go in, but it's, obviously there's a much larger project and issue there with the overall Pennsylvania widening project itself.
So that project actually is under design right now. We're working through the environmental that's associated with coming up under the Caltrans right away. that actually has construction dollars allocated to it through a agreement that we have with Party Construction. They're literally waiting on us to get them the final design. And again, we're jumping through the environmental steps right now.
I get lots of questions, and the most I can say, I hope in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I hope
Because the road meets all the everything you said here, that road has.
Yeah, and I mean, ideally, if we were hoping to begin construction in a reasonable short amount of time, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go through and put a maintenance effort in, a few months before that.
Speaking of Part D, you mentioned their work on Cherry Avenue. The worst flooding I've seen anyway, consistently, is at Cherry Avenue Brookside.
Right.
I mean, the road is like this. Is Part D's money going into part of that, or is that something we're gonna have to do on our own?
They're going to be improving the part of that intersection
Yeah.
so
Largely, that's county.
Yeah, but no, they are slated to do improvements on Brookside itself, so they've been, prior to them, essentially being done. The portion they're doing right now is they are extending their improvements on obviously the Beaumont side on Cherry to Brookside, but as part of a future effort in the relatively near future, there'll be some modifications to the culvert that goes underneath, and then they'll be improving the south side of Brookside because that is city property.
One of the limiting factors, though, on drainage over there is that it comes down, hits Brookside, goes underneath those tin horns that go underneath Cherry, and then goes back into county. And it's trying to weave its way through an earthen channel that goes into some backs of a bunch of lots that goes through. So from there, it finally hits a city channel again where it widens back up and flows
And
back.
it's not unusual for roadways to be used as drainage ways. And that's something in our last city, we were building roads specifically to be the conveyance channel. If you go out and look at the curb sizing on Brookside, my guess is if I were to probably pull the plans from way back when, that was their mission, was to pull that down the channel. And so unfortunately, yes, you get the localized drainage issues that come with that, but that was probably built that way. Now, we also have a bottleneck. And, but again, we've been, at least staff, consistently for the last year and a half that I've been here, has been working with the county to try to get that on an overall drainage master plan project.
Correct me on that, I mean, sorry,
Okay,
Mayor.
no, that's okay.
Let me jump in.
Do you have a question also?
No.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Let me jump in on the Brookside and the Cherry Avenue in there. I think that was corrected by the party early this year. They put a drainage system connected to underground on that. I don't know, maybe I'm mixing up on my understanding on,
At Brookside and Cherry?
yeah.
There will be doing some
Cherry.
improvements at the intersection. They have process plans, they are not approved, so they are, in the very near future, they will be extending Cherry just to that culvert itself. So that will be part of the future effort. 6 to 12 months, somewhere around there before they look at pulling approval and permits on that. It's
So
been
it's at a planning
separated.
stage.
Yes, but there hasn't been anything installed as of yet.
Okay. I
The way
remember
that drainage comes down, it's not conveyed down Cherry, it's actually conveyed across Cherry and then through that county channel.
Right.
So it kind of runs this way versus running this way down Cherry. And then, what you see off of Cherry across the street from, say, the middle school, that's the conveyance from the neighborhoods. It comes out of that upper area into that big drainage channel. And so,
That's the one.
that's all catching Cherry Valley, coming down and conveying through a county channel.
Okay, that's the catch-up Bigson. Okay, got me there. Thank you. Oh, can I jump in again?
Sure, it works.
Regarding the, on the in-house we have on this asphalt thing, are they certified or properly trained and then they're being certified by anyone to do the equipments, to lay out the asphalt and everything? Are they our in-house employees being certified?
Nobody's been really technically certified. There's been some trainings that have taken place by the people that have provided that we purchased the equipment from. So they have went through some extensive training on how to use the equipment, what material to use per the streets and the standards that we've been given. So, and the conditions in the street. So to say that somebody's been certified,
Okay.
I don't think there's a requirement for it.
Pardon me?
And I don't think there's a requirement for the operation of that equipment, it's just like they have
Okay.
proper training.
They wouldn't sell us the equipment if you needed to be certified. They would certify us first and then give us the equipment.
Okay. No, I'm just concerned about the insurance, on our side too. I mean,
Right.
I got to see that they're properly trained. That's all.
Jeff, as you take Beaumont Avenue and move it up, get up to 8th Street, et cetera, I realize that's not on the immediate plans, but as you do that, is it common to have those very deep dips that we have on Beaumont Avenue? Is there an alternative to that, or is that a common solution for a problem? It does slow the traffic down,
Right.
as does the stop signs, but does it have another purpose to have those deep dips, and are we going to keep those?
I mean, other than conveyance, for the surface drainage, there's very, very limited storm drain in that area.
I see.
So there is a significant amount of
So
drainage that
we'll
goes through. There are things that, that can be done to remedy those out. The problem is how far do you chase that? So if you make some modifications to the intersection itself, is now you're constructing significant distance, east and west on 6 in order to smooth those transitions out. There's some uneven crossfall we're seeing on the design that's being provided by our consultant from 5th to 6th especially. So we've got a fairly significantly steep crown on one side of the street, or cross-slope on one side of the street, and a shallow on the other side of the street. So trying to match existing conditions when you've got conditions like that into an intersection can lead to, some, probably less than desirable, differences in elevation.
But that gets to what you were talking about, that if you just fix a spot on drainage, you just end up chasing
Well,
it down the street, so to speak.
And that was one of the,
Like a remodel at your house.
Yeah.
that's one of the things we looked at, so we could minimize the crossfall that we have on that section, and just essentially what they call supering the street. So you have a straight crossfall from one curb and gutter to the other side. There's no traditional crown. And so you could lessen that, but the unintended consequence of that is, what does that do to the drainage itself? And so you've got a much larger tributary, and now all that water that was essentially going, half on this side of the street and half on the other is all going to one side of the street, and there's a real potential to inundate some of the limited facilities we have.
All right, thanks.
Can I interject on that? I mean, I'd like to congratulate you. The way I'll explain on that 6th Street and Beaumont Avenue, the drainage in there perfect. I mean, especially this last rainy season we had, it's really, really good. I mean, Christine, that was good. And then we used the big vacuum we have, the vector and everything. You clean it up on California and the one in Egan, and also on Wellwood. As soon as you clean up that, I mean, the water from that section, it flows so smooth. Yeah.
Man down there.
Yeah, you did pretty good, man. I mean,
The drainage out there is old, and it just got impacted with a bunch of stuff, so.
Oh.
It helps having the right people in the right places to know how to do it.
yeah, because now when I pass on the Beaumont Avenue and 6th Street, the water just run through, So I'm not concerned about that deep anymore. You're doing excellent.
Make sure you
on that.
slow.
So, just slow down a little bit because still help you there.
I think what Councilman Santos is saying is that once or twice a year, we have a little standing water is when he washes the underside of his car. Speeding up through those zones. So
Yeah, especially on, never mind.
All right, continue.
So as we move forward and look at some, ways to proceed, not only, with city staff here, but in the projects that we are in design now and ultimately procuring, we'll look at some alternative methods and emerging technology. And a few of those are cold-in-place recycling. It's pretty much just as it sounds like. So they plane the existing to a depth of 3 to 8 inches, which would pretty much be the entire paved surface. It's pulverized, and then it's mixed with an additive, and they use an emulsion agent, and they're able to put it back right in place. So there's several benefits. Cost is not always one of them, but there's several environmental benefits from both the kind of the toxic odors that they have, and then the amount of truck trip generations that you would incur because of that. It really is one long train, and it's pretty much entirely done right on site. For some smaller segments, it may not make sense, but if additional funding or for larger scale projects became available, it starts to make better sense over longer stretches. Full depth reclamation is kind of just as it sounds, and that's kind of a pulverize in place. So you would pulverize the existing asphalt as it sits. It would become largely your base course, and then you would put a new wearing surface right on top of that. A cape seal, which is kind of what we were mentioning here for Oak Valley, or there may be other candidate streets as well, which is essentially it's a chip seal, and then it's overlaid with either a micro seal or a slurry seal. A bonded wearing cores is essentially we just add a polymer. It's kind of in between, the thickness is in between like a slurry seal and a overlay, but they add a polymer to it to enhance kind of the strength of it. It gives a little bit better wearing surface. Not quite as the longevity that you would see potentially from an overlay, but it is at a reduced cost, but better than a slurry seal. And then rubberized hot mix asphalt. And that's kind of imminent all over, and that would be relatively easy to implement. The other thing is there's the ability for Cal Recycle grants, because they use recycled rubber as well. And so up to $350,000 annual for local agencies and $500,000 on regional projects. So we will definitely be looking into implementing that as part of our bid package and moving forward in our reconstructed streets. Yeah. So the treatment selection is obviously it's important to pick the right treatment for the right road, and essentially what is the best bang for the buck moving forward, with a focus on preventative and low-cost treatment. Slurry seal generally applicable to light cracking and other surface defections. Localized repairs, can be done internally as necessary. The mill and overlay is the best alternative for heavily deteriorated, but yet not to a full failure condition. It's moderately expensive and can be done on a limited number of roads, and then the full depth reconstruction is pretty much utilized when all other possibilities have been exhausted. High cost and limited capabilities in the amount that you can do annually really limit this option. And then let's Todd speak to some of the budget analysis.
Oh, thank you. So why is it whenever an engineer says we're going to use polymer, you're thinking, yeah, let's use polymer? Why is that?
I get excited.
Y'all ever feel that way?
Oh, no.
Yeah? Okay. Jeff said he used polymer toothpaste. It's like, where do I get that? Thank you. It's not being legit. So when we did the position or the pavement conditions analysis, one of the things that they looked at was at the time how much the city was actually budgeting for road maintenance. And so to kind of look back at that time, we were not yet in a position where we had fully stood up our in-house street maintenance crew. We basically had 2 people out of community services who were throwing down cold patch, right? And driving over with the rear tire of the dump truck. So we've obviously progressed since that point, but that's kind of really what this looked at. And so if we'd stayed on that track, we would have been spending $500,000 a year, and we would have seen a significant amount of degradation with regard to the existing roadway network. And that's because more of our stuff's going to fail. The newer stuff that is there was going to continue to age, and there wouldn't have been enough money to adequately maintain that to reverse those. So whenever we have a roadway section and we apply a treatment, that score goes back from either 60 or 75 or whatever that number is, it goes back up to 100, and then it starts the depreciation process thereafter, which is what's critical for us to redo these studies every once in a while. So then we looked at an analysis of what it might take in order to basically keep status quo. So what is the level of investment that would have to happen? And so we looked at $1 million for the first 2 years, and then ultimately we begin to grow to $2.5, $3, and $4 million. So again, that would be kind of the baseline or a baseline strategy to stop the degradation. But again, you're not making headway as you move forward. And ultimately, what was the level of effort we might need to look at in order to try to make a little bit of upgrade. So we get ourselves with a $7 million initial investment up to 76, and then it takes 3 to 4 million a year every year thereafter in terms of maintenance dollars in order to keep you at 76. So to kind of run through some numbers, if you go back to one of the earlier graphs that Jeff showed you, that pie chart, it showed you the different colors and where we were in different stages. So if you look at the failed section at about 7.5% of our roadway network, that's 21 miles of failed. The significant at-risk streets was 21 miles of at-risk streets. Poor, 21 miles. So, you were at a total of 63 miles basically between failed to poor condition or at risk. So if you look at the numbers, the most current numbers we have for road maintenance to take care of all of it, $13.6 million is what it would take in today's dollars, we think, to address all that. So you're trying to fix 63 miles at one time. Obviously, that's a ton of road miles, lane miles to try to address at one time. You're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30 or so miles of street actually that would actually be maintained or maintenanced, during the course of that work. So one of the limiting factors is not only the time of year and seasonal, but the other factors that kind of go into it are the other coordination issues that have to go in with the other utilities. So, for example, Beaumont Cherry Valley Water is working with Jeff and his crew right now to look at utility line relocates up Beaumont Avenue. They know they have some conflicts that they want to relocate, and they've got some issues like that. So as he's planning and programming, he's also reaching out primarily to Beaumont Cherry Valley Water to look at getting things out of the way so that we don't repair something and get in a problem. One of the issues that we really ran into with the 8th Street reconstruction program is that we had water lines and services that were probably within 2 feet of the surface. And so if you remember, our original bid had us paying $750,000 to relocate those. The Water District actually came in and for a third of that price actually relocated those services and those lines. They still weren't able to locate them deep enough in some areas, so we couldn't do the full depth we wanted to. We had to lose alternative things in order to get that road reconstructed. So we're going to get into those issues all over the city, whether there's base material, if it's pavement over dirt, whether it's utility lines that are not located deep enough that need to be relocated. All those things are going to play. And if the Water District is bidding out those water lines, there's a process for design, there's a process for bid execution of those contracts, which have to be done and cleared out before we can actually get in and do our work. So that's another factor that kind of rolls into the timing of all these things that we're doing. So this graph kind of just gives you an idea in terms of the remaining value of road work that's left depending on the different levels of investment. So that's just really kind of showing kind of what the impact is. And obviously, the less money we spend up front, the more maintenance we defer, the more costly it gets into the out years. It's kind of straightforward there. So we've gone back and we've looked at the recurring funding sources that we have for the next 5 years. So we think that we're projecting that we've got a total of $9.9 million coming to you right now. And so what you'll see is a total of between 1.3 to almost $2 million. If you'll notice, in 2023 and 2024, you have a significant reduction in Measure A revenue, and that's pursuant to our settlement agreement with WRCOG. So that's when they begin to take their portion of that. We intentionally took 100% for the first 5 years of that settlement agreement so that we could begin to get on top of our roadway maintenance expenses. So, but at the end of the day, I mentioned we had 13.6 million that had been identified in the last pavement condition index study, and you've got 9.9 million in the next 5 years. So again, now it comes down to the question of what is that balance? What is it that we need to do? What is it council wants to do? Y'all have already talked about tonight of some other major capital needs that are out there. Well, how do we consume that? And then how do we really tackle that? So if you look at roughly 1.5 million being available to you a year which is a little bit faster than what the 5-year forecast originally called for in the initial years, a little bit less than some of the outer years, but kind of getting towards the same number. So as of today, with a base level of maintenance, which basically keeps your PCI at 71, you're looking at about $1.4 million in terms of that maintenance cost. Again, that's just holding the line. It's not taking care of any deferred maintenance issues that are out there necessarily. So what you're looking at is 14 lane miles of slurry, about 4 lane miles of mill and overlay, and then your reconstruction is about a lane mile. So if you actually look at how many actual drivable miles that would be, that's about 8 to 9 miles, depending on the condition of the streets that we're trying to rehab. So if you start to look at the catch-up scenario, you say, okay, if we want to try to catch up within a 10-year window, how much would we need to do, and what would the benefit of that be? And so scenario 1 brings you up into about an 11-year maintenance cycle. Not necessarily means that you're going to fix everything in 11 years. What that really means is for major maintenance, you're coming back to a street every 11th year. You know, ideally, you want to be touching your roads for major maintenance between 10 to 15 years at the very outside. It doesn't mean you're not seal cracking, you're not doing any of your slurry seals, things like that. You need to continue to do the surface maintenance to prevent water and erosion from getting down into the base of the street. Because remember, the base of the street is the dirt and the rocks underneath. It's not the pavement that's on top, right? So we're trying to use that to seal it up and keep the base solid. So that number is about 2.7 million. To actually begin to make the progress, I think that most of our community would love to see, meaning we're trying to get to major maintenance within a 5 to 9 year window. You're looking at spending about $4.2 million. And with that, you can see once you begin to get to scenario 1 and 2, the slurry seal numbers begin to level off because there's only so much you're going to be able to do. There's also so much appetite our citizens are going to have for road construction and road maintenance because it is a bear. It is a pain, you know, and when we're working on multiple streets in an area, it can become problematic for the citizens. What you can see that we pick up between these scenarios is really the mill and overlay and then the reconstruction. So those two elements are things that we would advance significantly under this program. So again, when I talked initially about balance, this is kind of things we're talking about. This is the overall balance that you have, that you're trying to walk between what is it you would like to see as a council and then how much resource do we have or are we willing to bring to bear. So what does this mean in terms of the overall dollars? So if you look at the 5-year investment requirement for the base, you actually have about an additional 1.7 million potentially if our revenue projections hold. One of the things to remember is that with our CIP, we said we're not going to spend those sales taxes, particularly the SB1 and the Measure A, until we know that they're in, that we have them. And so we show that revenues coming in for 19 really will reflect what we'd collected through 18, the 18-19 fiscal year, and they come in for expenditure in 19. So that's how that goes. So these reflect kind of prior year revenue projections rolling forward into next year. But you can see when you get to 2023, that's when you see you basically hit your break even in terms of your annual revenue that comes in. So you have a period of about 3 years here where you're doing a little bit better, where the bulk of those monies come from. So you'll notice too that that the cost factor goes up. I've applied a 2.5% CPI factor to those costs. So those are already factoring in CPI as well as our revenue projections. So again, you see scenario 2, you wind up about 800 to $1.5 million behind every year. And then when you get to scenario 2, you're $3 million a year roughly behind the revenue stream that you would need during that 5-year period. So one of the things that we would look at, obviously, there's 21 miles of failed street that we can't reconstruct, even within a 2 or 3 year window. That's a lot of road to try to rebuild. So what would we do? We would look at some temporary measures to help keep those roads safe, to keep them drivable, to keep the appearance of them looking decent. There is a broken panes theory, particularly for streets, is a neighborhood that has good streets, that has good fresh-looking asphalt, are neighborhoods where people take more pride. There's typically a better feel and better buy-in into those neighborhood areas. We feel better when our neighbors look better. And so there's some very good purposes behind that. Now, it may be putting a slurry seal over a street that ultimately may need to be reconstructed. It may be planned for reconstruction, but at least we're trying to keep the street looking better and driving better than just keeping hands off and just letting it to continue to deteriorate. But we know that that's not necessarily the most judicious use of the funds, but it's an appropriate use of funds because we're trying to achieve a bigger purpose with that. So as Christine and Jeff begin to develop their programming and look at that, there's strategies like that may bring forward that you may say, but I thought you said that was alligator. It is. We're going to do a spot repair, and then we're going to do this for now, with a plan, in the next several years when time becomes available to do that. So anyway, so that's kind of the fiscal conditions and the fiscal balance that we're going to have to look at as we kind of way through. So you have enough money coming in to do the baseline, to keep yourself from sliding further downhill in terms of the overall PCI in the system, but there's not enough revenue right now to really make a significant impact in terms of improving the overall condition and to catch up on deferred maintenance that's occurred for many, many years. So.
So as far as preventative measures, we've actually touched on most of these kind of throughout. And so we talked about a pavement moratorium a little bit. We do have a draft that we'd like to bring before the council in the next month or so. And I think that will go a long ways towards protecting our streets from future damage. The updated city specification and standard, we will work on that. That is more of a department level assigned task. And then Todd touched on the utility coordination that needs to happen. So there is utility coordination that's going on, primarily with the water district, but with some of the dry utilities as well. We talk about maybe some of these people coming in with communications and fiber like that, and what can we do to ensure that, we're not tearing up newly resurfaced or reconstructed streets. And, as future measures, as we work and develop the CIP that will be inclusive of sewer improvements as well, we will make sure that we work those in concert with the expected road rehabilitation and prioritize those projects ahead of any future road construction. And in conclusion here, it's we can't stress enough that it's how important it is to perform the right treatment on the right road, at the right time. Obviously, we're all limited by time and funding. In an ideal world, we'd be able to resurface every single street, but it all is, as Todd mentioned, it is a balance of, what do we have available to us and what's the best bang for that buck, so to speak. The value in fixing the roads early in the process of, and minimizing deterioration is key. I think that, with the projects that we have ongoing and then the ability to do more and more in-house, that we are taking significant strides at minimizing that, but it's a tall task for us to undertake. Slurry seal is an effective treatment. It just needs to be used, as early in the process as possible. So once we start to get prevalent cracking and longer range, the value is not there. It still has a benefit, but the preferred expected value of 5 to 7 years becomes less and less as the longer we neglect it. To keep up progress on heavily deteriorated roads and to maintain a well-balanced approach for citywide road rehabilitation. And that will entertain questions, comments.
Nice. All right, well, thank you for that. So, do we have any questions about before we get direction and see what he wants us to really discuss? Anything on the slides? I think we asked pretty much on the slides as we went through it. So, Todd, it looks like you're looking for direction and discussion. So, what would you like us to discuss? What kind of focus are you looking at?
Well, I guess that, yeah, I guess, well, the overall discussion. So when we adopted the PCI study, the pavement management study, we kind of walked through I can't remember exactly what kind of specific detail, but I don't recall that we had a lot of discussion about what city council's desired level of service was. I mean, what do you want to see as your preferred maintenance of effort? And so when you look at our financial constraints, it's kind of important to kind of figure out where y'all go and kind of what strategies, do you want us to look at? So to kind of recap, what we're proposing here is a strategy that says stop the bleeding to a certain extent. So we know that the best way to do that initially is to get out and to do things like slurry seals. So where we have things that are falling into higher risk categories, we're capturing those, we're preventing that. So it's a preventative effect. And then kind of the same theory goes along with some of the mill and overlay. The reconstruction is very limited right now because we feel like the best bang for the buck is to put it into the preventative side to prevent more Pennsylvanias from occurring, to prevent more Beaumont Avenues from happening, and then begin to work on those other components of it. So if we kind of go back to that slide on page, because you know me, I like looking at tables more than pictures, I think. But if you look at page 35 or slide 35, that's the one that really kind of speaks volumes to me, is kind of where we see. So if you look at it, if our revenue projections are right or close, you basically have, if you looked at construction, you say, well, Todd, take that 1.6 million and put that into construction. That's basically 1.5 lane miles, or about 3/4 of a mile of reconstruction. Is all, for example, that money's going to do for you. So I guess my first question is, are you comfortable with the initial strategy, which is to do the base, concentrate on preventative maintenance? We know we've got some major capital projects we're working on right now to address, for example, Beaumont Avenue. We've got Pennsylvania reconstruction, which is coming under a different funding source. And then really to pursue some of those other grant funds like the 350 for rubberized asphalt. So really maintenance effort. I will tell you that's a significant increase in service and maintenance effort that we would have had since the last 3 years kind of went into play. The other thing that's important with the MOE is, again, as we know, with the state of California, is maintaining that appropriate level of capital investment for maintenance of effort within these streets. And so we have to be cognizant of that as well. So some of these funds have to be plugged into addressing some of those issues. So that's a long question, loaded, biased question potentially, but just make sure that, are y'all comfortable with that strategy?
Well, here's my question on that before we continue, is that it shows that we're also discussing CIP.
Yes.
CIP list. So
Well, yeah.
how are we going to discuss that without discussing the list?
Well, the CIP that we really have really is rolled into the funds we have set aside towards the slurry seal.
Okay. That's
And so, those kinds of things. So we really kind of have put them really as more major maintenance that can be utilized throughout the city. So one of the scheduling questions really is, are we trying to hit major thoroughfares, or are we trying to hit areas? Meaning, are we wanting to come in and say, hey, let's take care of all Beaumont Avenue and let's take care of 4th Street, or 6th Street, or are we saying, hey, let's look at these block groups and address block groups or address neighborhood groups as opposed to longer linear things, because one of the things that we've talked about, I've touched with everybody on council offline, is a concern of, well, how come this block got done across, 2 streets over, my street's just as bad, why wasn't mine touched? And so that's a legitimate question. There's also a cost factor if our contractors aren't having to remobilize from one part of town to the other. We also have some economies of scale potentially of not having to relocate. So they come in, we blanket a neighborhood, we say, hey, come in, make sure you don't park on the street this day because we're doing whatever treatment we're doing. What we would propose is to really kind of really try to locate more physically, geographically within an area. So we take care of sections. And obviously, those sections are going to concentrate primarily in Central City, where the streets currently are in the worst condition. And, you know, it may, like I said, it may be a situation where this requires a mill and overlay, this requires slurry seal, this requires reconstruction in the middle. We may do the mill and overlay and a slurry, and we may just do some spot repairs and slurry on the other section, knowing that the reconstruction may have to happen in a few years. But at least we're getting out there, it feels consistent, it's a better quality street than what was there before. So those are kind of the leading questions I have for you on kind of CIP strategy.
Well, I'll tell you, as an elected official, one of the main things we're judged on from the public is our infrastructure and our streets. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but you're constantly pointing and fit this and the potholes in the streets and the cracks and that, and it is a constant from a variety of residents that we get bombarded with. So I think that, you know, just to put my 2 cents in, those areas that you see public-wide at a large number would give the idea that we are moving to things rather than trying to go too, small. So I know not a big project, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying those areas where it's traveled by a very good number of our residents. And I guess we'll be talking about alleyways at the same time, somewhere in there.
Sure.
So that's just my 2 cents, and we'll have more discussion. So jump in, anyone?
Okay.
Mike?
What I like the idea of the neighborhoods only because in some areas you haven't touched for over 30 years, and that was just with patching. And so you're going to go in, and it's difficult because we're way, way behind the 8 ball. And there hasn't been any maintenance program for this poor town for, well, over 30 years. So I'd like to see the neighborhoods get done because, again, the broken window thing that you mentioned is true. And the concern that I has is you're going to be, if you go back and you start slurry sealing for maintenance purposes, you're going to just continue to push maintenance off of the streets that need it the most because you're not going to have the funds to go back and do these larger repairs or these more, where these streets are degraded. And I know more about the neighborhood I live in than other neighborhoods, and so you start off on your PowerPoint and it's like, okay, check, and you see all 8 things in the neighborhood that I live in, and then you talk about slurry sealing a street that doesn't look half as bad and has just been installed maybe 15 years ago. And you don't touch anything that hasn't been done in 30 years or 35 years or 40 years. And so I like the neighborhood idea because I think you spread the wealth, I guess. And when you look at the overall average, you include that neighborhood that hasn't been touched in 40 years. And so you're saying we're all at 73% or the PCI number. And so, but if you would just take that neighborhood by itself, it's probably in the 50 to 40 range. So if we could kind of elevate all the streets to the same level, if that's even possible, I know it's an uphill battle, and it's nobody's fault that's here. We're actually getting it fixed now, which is a good thing, but it's difficult to explain to somebody that hasn't had maintenance on their street for over 30 years why a street that was just laid 15 years ago is getting maintenance. It just doesn't make sense to them. It doesn't make sense to me either, but I understand the problems that we have. So that's just my 2 cents.
So looking at this map, I think, what we would probably come to you with and what our existing list of streets, because we obviously look at more streets than we can do.
Right.
Because some will fall out with utility conflicts and such. But you would try to hit some of these purples that you're seeing up on the map with the slurry seal. And that would be the first place that you would go. The reds may or may not. I mean, those just may be red for 5 to 10 years because you may not get to them.
Right.
If you're doing the maintenance program that the city manager laid out. But yes, you're right. I mean, part of the education process will be, not letting the green fall to purple and explaining that to people best we can and doing some public education. But I think from a slurry seal aspect, the first several years, once we get past Beaumont Ave, would be to look at those purples to see how quick we can get in and slurry seal and put a wearing surface on top of that and bring that back up to a green for you. But your reds will likely stay red for a while. And I know that's not what you want to hear, but unless, otherwise we're doing 3/4 to a mile, maybe a mile and a half, and that's all you're getting, and everything else on that map begins to fall. I think that's kind of the option that you have, because certainly we can go do all reconstruction with your 1.5 million, but you're gonna get about a mile and a half of linear in a residential section. And I just don't know that that's where you wanna be.
The other thing to think about is so many of these subdivisions have occurred within a 10 to 15-year window. And so a lot of these roadway sections are going to start to come apart at the same time, you know, and so you have a burgeoning maintenance issue, you know, coming up. So what we're trying to do is achieve that balance of not letting that situation happen, because if that happens, it'll be even, it's kind of, it's opposite of common sense almost, right? It's kind of counterintuitive, because if we don't maintain those, we're going to actually have less opportunity to get back in and take care of those areas that have been deferred for 30 or 40 years, you know, because we're forever chasing this downhill. We're up there with this.
It's almost like painting wood on the outside of your house.
Right.
You know, you don't let it get to the rotten stage, which we've unfortunately done on some of the red areas. You continue to paint it, coat it, make sure that it stays in the green, so that you're not having to replace sections. Unfortunately, now we're replacing sections of the house.
Yeah, but it just seems like if we, at least to me, that you would just continue to maintain the green, and the red, the purple, and the orange will just continue to deteriorate, and you'll never get to it. It'll fall apart before you,
Yeah,
but everything else will stay the same.
I think that's what, so on the red's as bad as it's gonna get. I mean, we'll continue to patch repair and do things like that as much as we can do in-house, but it's where it's gonna be. The purples is where, you know, Jeff's first attack will be for slurry seal, hoping that all of those purples can come back into greens.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, unfortunately, and then where you would hit the mill and overlay, you can't see it very well in here, but there are some orange sections. We would hit the orange sections with the mill and overlay. And then you would do very limited reds until you can get caught up on the greens. You're just gonna put an amount towards reds. That would be our recommendation to you.
You know what I'd like to see is both Julio and Mike brought up some good points, and then couple that with what Todd brought up regarding a geographical area. I would think that you could do an analysis based on a geographical area that's going to hit neighborhoods as well as some of as Julio was talking about, some of the more well-traveled areas. So you pick a section of, you know, a few blocks wide that's going to do both, so that we can educate the community that we're both addressing some of those 30-year-old roads, and at the same time, we're also addressing one of the more well-traveled roads at the same time. And I think if you were to come back, or you don't even need to come back to us, but if you were to take that analysis approach, and I know there's some really good software that can do that kind of stuff, and I'm not mentioning any companies, but where you come back and say, you know, this 2 square block area will cost us this much to do, but you're going to hit 3 of the 30-year-old roads, and you're going to hit 6th Street or one of the main well-traveled, and then that way people recognize that we're not focusing on either the 30 years or just the highly traveled ones. And so you take into account the geographical area as well as the neighborhoods and the overall. And that way we're staying in one area. And then you can do an analysis to figure out what the 3 or 4 worst overall areas are that's going to hit all of those.
I I get the logic of maintaining the green areas so that they don't degrade. It's very logical. Your explanation makes a lot of sense. However, we still have the same message that we all feel, I think, pretty much is important, which is that the core of the city that's red, it just seems like it constantly gets neglected. And even though the logic, when you do it strictly on logic, you say, okay, let's maintain these green streets because the overall PCI is going to go down and, you know, it's going to be more expensive later. I just hate leaving that red area untouched. I hate the message that it gives the community. I hate the image that it gives that that area is somewhat more neglected. I think that it encourages a bit more bad stuff to happen when you don't give the message that we're cleaning our house constantly. And it really bothers me. But the underlying problem to that is funding. You just don't have enough money to paint the whole house, you know, and I get that. So there's no perfect answer to this, except for getting more money. And the intention is there for everybody to do a better thing about the red. And I agree with the neighborhood idea. If we can address the red area, I think doing it in a cohesive neighborhood way where the message really gets out. I don't know how you start to approach that. You know, maybe you look at the neediest street in there, but maybe you just actually march across the red area so that you meet the green area at one particular point and give the residents the message that we're trying to move the green area in on the red area in a logical pattern, that the neighborhood would at least understand that we really do have the best intention. But I hate to say this, we need more money. And we need to figure out how to get more money. And we sit here with these hard discussions where we try to do a better thing, and there's just not enough to go around. We talk about the fire station, and the need to get it in place is greater than time is allowing us to do. We talk about improving the roads. We have a crew, not a certified crew, but certainly an outstanding one. And we need to approach it in a faster way. I would like, at some time at a council meeting, and I realize any council member can put something forth to potentially put on the agenda with the mayor and the council's agreement, but at some point, I'd like the community to weigh in on would they want something like a 1-cent sales tax on $1 to be able to improve some sort of a cohesive plan that gets us to catch up on time in a better, faster way across the city. Because nobody understands that we sit here and we try as hard as we can to speed up the timeline, because we really do want to make the change, but we can't. There's just not enough answers for us. And I refuse to leave behind the red area of the city. I think we need to send a message. I don't care how small the neighborhood is we pick, but I think we need to figure out how to send a message that we are addressing them.
You know, I think we need to look at the return on investment. And I think long-term, it's gonna, if we cannot spend, we have to spend money on the green. Because I think on the long term, our return on investment is gonna be a lot higher if we're able to address more of the green streets and keeping them from falling into another color at this point. So there's gotta be a blend there. Otherwise, if we just address the reds and just those parts, then the rest, we're gonna have a much bigger bill 10 years down the line than we are if we don't take a balanced approach to it. And I think since the cost is a lot lower for slurry, that it's even not really a fully balanced approach, but a little more balanced towards our return on investment based on what we put into it.
On my side, I mean, I do believe on maintenance, on, on the city, any properties we have, and on the maintenance on the slurry treatment, I will go for that. I mean, to maintain just like a return on investment on that side, and if we don't do that every year, man, we will get worse. And that's the way I see it on the whole project you have in here. And now back on the red, on the neighborhoods, especially on the, all the industries, the trucks and everything, I mean, California, man, it's getting worse in there. I mean, the neighborhoods in there, now they're in red, maybe they're in black now. Well, man, it's a big hole. I mean, they're turning around and everything. I know it's not in your project, but I have to address that because, all those small communities in there is suffering right now because it's getting worse in there. I mean, if we could, our crew could do something in there, to treat now, But back on the whole project, I like the slurry treatment, and then the Beaumont, we need to attract good, not only the tourists, I mean, people that, travel a lot on our community. And also, like, she's talking about the funding right now. On this, we need to look on the closing of the 60 freeway. And they're using our roads. I mean, they're using our streets. We have to look now, how can we be compensated on using our roads and traffics and safety, our policemen, and, so we have to, plug in on that, so we could be compensated on that. I mean, that will be 6 months. If you look in there on a Sunday, especially this Sunday in here, the freeway is jam-packed. And they're using our 6th Street, they're using our, all our roads in here. I don't know what's the mechanic on that. I mean, how can we ask for a compensation on that side? That's beside on now they're totally closed on going westbound on 60. Now they're using the, they're using the, what's that, desert lawn on that side. San Mateo Canyon and also Oak Valley Parkway. So, that's a thing that, probably we could, look on some, some factor that funding for us on this side. Not a big money, but the thing is something that we could be compensated. Thank you.
Another thing that's not even on here are the blue from the alleyways. Now, I went to go look behind the post office at the alleyway. I was called by some businessmen to go look at their alleys by their businesses because customers have claimed they've been tripping and stuff, and now that we have a liability concern because they're concerned about getting sued, and then they look at us and say, well, isn't that the city's property? And we found out that it is. So, we have, even though they're not main places, they're still bring a liability towards us, and we need to kind of look at that because that's not even addressed on here. And it's a whole nother issue. It's not a main thoroughfare and it's not a neighborhood. You figure alleyway would have the least, priority. Right. But now you're looking at liability because when it's linked to places like post offices and commercial where you have people that can, potentially get hurt, where does that increase our liability? So that's something that I want to make sure that we address as well as we maybe look at this geographical approach that Mr. White mentioned.
Can I interject on that?
Sure. Oh, you had a question,
Go ahead. On that alleyway, I mean, I don't know what's our ordinances on the all the alleys we have. Probably you have to visit that. That would be nice to have a, our alley would be really free flow, no parking, no debris or anything in there, even no encroachment of, of trees and everything in there. Because there's a lot of people, using our alley, dropping their stuff in there, they're parking there. they're using as a parking space. In LA, in Orange County, you cannot use that. You cannot use the alley as a parking spot. So just to interject that, if we visit that, I mean, we could visit the ordinances and that would be great. So there will be a free flow on especially in downtown. I like to see downtown. It has a good alley in there. If you look on, I will mention the city, like Redlands. What they did is they clean up the alley. Now they're using a lot on alley. People could walk in there freely. LA, when I was there, I mean, I used to live in there. Alley, you don't walk. You don't even think about walking on the alley in there. You will have a problem. So I don't want that on our directions in here. Thank you.
Just real quick clarification, that particular section by the post office is part of the actual effort they're doing for the design package we have now. There was some remaining money in a local div fund that's no longer for alleyway improvement. So that will be improved as part of that, and that tripping hazard will be looked at as well. So there is that section. But as far as, moving forward, we don't have a means to maintain those. What we have done in some instances, and the tree crews have looked at, is taking some of the grindings and be able to use those to at least create a better weathered surface. It's not ideal as a, concrete or fresh asphalt, but it does create for a much better surface.
Well, and in that case, we just have to go as it comes about, where, when it comes to our attention, then the first thing I hear is liability, so I want to, make sure we look at that, get that addressed, and if we can find a way.
Those areas, though, where those alleys are public right-of-ways, then that is a city maintenance responsibility in those areas. So we have to factor those into our CIP, and, again, we need funding to address those, but.
Mr. Trivia?
Yeah. I'm a big believer in a big plan here. We can't make up for what hasn't been done in the past. We don't have the funding. Everybody said that about funding. And I think a 1 cent tax just wouldn't go for this. I mean, listen to your people out here. Everybody's enraged about the taxes and the Melloroos, which they thought went for infrastructure. I think you got to go with a plan that shows people you're working. One, it's a communication thing, is to say, hey, look, this has been neglected. Own up to it. You can't miss it. And we're going to put a plan into effect, and this is the way it goes with the recommendations that we've received, the analysis that we've done. I look at doing the green areas because it shows you're doing something, you're moving forward. If we took all our money and went in the red areas, we'd do little bits at a time, taking care of a couple blocks in a neighborhood, and then everybody else, the other 45, 50,000 people in Beaumont wouldn't know anything was going on. I think you want to show them you're doing something, and the way to do it is take care of those low-hanging fruits up there, make them look good and say, wow, they are working on it and persevering. And in the communication, you let them know it takes time and money for the big jobs where you got to renovate the whole thing. So it's just my thought on telling people what you're going to do. Own up that it just hasn't been done, we're going to do it, and here's how we're going to tackle it. And start showing them results.
Anyone else jump in?
Like I could jump in. I mean, on the post office, if I recall, we have a budget on that for $34,000 to do that. If I corrected, I mean, recall that. I mean, you can probably during that time we did the budget way back early this year, and we put it. I think the finance also finance and audit put up $34,000 to do that. I mean, probably you could check that out. I mean, it would cost you on that side. Thank you.
I'm good.
I was asking a question about a connecting road. I have a resident expert to the left of me, so I have an advantage.
Can I personally interject something? We have to put it on the priority, on 13th Street and also the Chestnut on there. I mean, that one is like you're doing a moonwalk on that side, man. I mean, from 8th Street, actually up to 6th Street to going to 13th Street on Chestnut Avenue in there, and it's getting worse. I mean, it's if you look in there, it look like it look okay, but just like you mentioned, on the compaction on the ground was not properly done on that street, and also in Michigan, so.
So Mike got
Thank
you
you.
over for barbecue?
If he invites me, I mean, you know.
I didn't get invited to this barbecue.
No, I mean, that's the truth. I mean, you know, I travel there. I mean, you know, Michigan is one of the streets also. I mean, and California, I mean, the California up to, you know, 10th Street is bad. But.
But we could go all night on.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
we could go all night with all our numbers and
Yeah,
stuff, so.
I mean,
we'll
I just
leave-
like to take this opportunity right now, so.
You on camera, that's fine.
Oh, it's in red, you know.
So I think, you know, we have this geographical versus neighborhood type of discussion thing. But again, the overall is the money that we have and the money that we would need to expand it, you know, citywide. So I hope that what you're hearing is we're gonna go back and kind of put some stuff together to see what we get the bang for our buck. Come back and say, hey, this is where we can do. And then we can look at it to say, okay, I think that's, you know, gonna cover maybe a neighborhood or some of it, or we're gonna, you know, I don't know, you're gonna have to put it, you know,
Well,
in
I
numbers.
think this has been very beneficial because, you know, if you go back to that slide, shows all the,
35?
so slide 34, so the base. So kind of looking at that parameter is where we'd like to try to target, okay, that's the capacity lane miles, which we think we can budget. Is to begin to target, where do we target that 14 miles, 4 miles, and 1 mile? And then, you know, how do we do it so it's more cohesively done?
Right.
And, you know, ideally, what I personally like, and Mike, you hit the nail on the head, because, you know, as bureaucrats, what we like to do is say, no, hold on. We need to put the money where most of the need is, which we quantify as amount of traffic. But in doing that, you only take care of your collectors and arterials. That piece of it, you never, ever get into the neighborhoods. And so, you know what we had developed back in Texas, actually, was the concept of trying to go into more comprehensive pockets of area. So we're taking care of a section of a neighborhood at a time.
Right.
And so that was very critical, you know, to the residents. So I appreciate y'all's input on that. And so I think, again, this is the envelope that we have to work within in terms of money and in terms of distance and length of roadway we can work on. So my proposal would be to go to work on that, look at where we target those, and come back to you and report to you back on what that looks like.
And it would be interesting for future discussions as we continue with budgets to start looking at the catch-ups to see where
Yes.
we can start digging up stuff or adjusting stuff or whatever it would take to move that.
And also with the green streets, there are different levels of
Greenness.
green, right? So I mean, there may be some that are even more cost efficient to do now, or some that,
It's a wide range, so there's
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
lower, there may be some of them, they're, you know, they may still have easily another 8 to 10 years before we do anything. Some of them, you know, that, I think a lot of them that are, you know, our own crews can, you know, prolong the life of those by, you know, staying on top of any crack ceiling or any
right.
really small little spot failures that occur.
Do we have the PCI report, is that online?
I don't know if it's online, but yeah,
Is it possible to put that online?
We can put it online, and we can, do y'all want us to, well, we can put it online, let you know it's out there. So, it was online for a while. I think
Was it?
it's- Yeah, we'll put it back.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you. I have to agree totally with Barry about communications. As you can see by the enormous crowd here tonight, 95% of the people who live in Beaumont don't have a clue
Right.
of what we're facing economically. They don't have a clue about the history and the misuse and the whole sordid thing that has put us behind the 8 ball for all these years. We have to spell that out in detail and tell the public what you're facing. You're going to get complaints and bitching and moaning. You're going to get that no matter what. But at least people, you understand, you're being honest, you're being transparent, and And you're giving them the idea to get input on what are not some great options, but at least are options. So I think that's critical at this point.
Well, Councilmember Carroll brought up, I know we're the 1 cent, or going back and talking about funding. When you look at your stats that you provided, there's just no way we'll ever catch up with the funding, with the current funding sources we have. And unless we get some type of an infusion, we'll always just be chasing our tails. So use the analogy of the house. You'll never be able to replace the rotted wood, and you'll just keep painting over the rotted wood, and it'll deteriorate, and your house will fall apart before you get enough money to fix it all. And I just think it'd be worth sometime in the future bringing that back and talking about that, because it's just, first it was staffing, and then it was equipment, and now it's just funding. We're fighting an uphill battle constantly. And communication, I agree. I was hoping to see more people here that would be interested in what we're trying to do, and unfortunately, we're not getting that, so got to get the word out.
Well, we got 4 people watching, so.
How many?
4.
All right.
One's me, so 3.
Now you're down to 2.
No.
Yeah. And 1,
I didn't know
2.
you could tell how many people watch.
Yeah.
How many here for what?
Say hi, Carrie. Hi, Carrie.
Okay.
All right.
What else do you need from us?
I was going to say, we do the monthly manager's message, and so this would definitely be a key element that will be on the manager's message, so it goes out. So I think we're up to 5 people reading it, so I appreciate y'all reading your manager's message.
Oh.
Oh, we have a manager?
Oh, wait a minute.
Come on.
We have a report?
I do want to say, I agree with Councilmember White about that in the green area, there's a lot of differences in the green area. Some of them the streets are only 2 or 3 years old, and some of them, they're 9.5 years old. So, I don't want to complicate your map, but, a little bit of age representation in some of that area might be a little
Yeah, the
helpful.
backup to the PCI report does have, it has a tabular analysis of all the
Right.
streets, and it'll tell you what the expected remaining life on those is. So there is those details in the backup data for that PCI report. And some, in reality, some weather and wear better than others. It's not just solely based on age. There's other factors that go into that. But there is that analysis that has been done in support of that PCI report.
One of
Well,
the,
and, I'm sorry, and as we do more with what we're doing for economic development, with the movie theater and the stores, and we go in that direction, we're actually going to pull more people off of the 10 and that are driving through to come through and go to the restaurants and stop and buy gas and whatever. Well, that's traffic on our streets that's going to increase, not even in relationship to our residents, but, that's, the more we become attractive to get off the highway at, the more that means somebody's going to drive on your streets. And the more opportunity to get a penny from them. Sorry.
Can I?
Oh, you're going to jump in, okay.
No, I still believe on the doing a maintenance on our roads and everything. I'll repeat myself. Do the scheduling and on the slurry, treatment, and especially on the side of Beaumont. We need to do the constructions on that to attract more people. Going in on our city. Let's do it. And then also I think that's part of the also on the specific plan on the downtown specific plan, right? And then after that, we could do the striping and all those stuff. That's another issue on that. How are we going to do that? Doing all the bike lanes and all those, on that particular area.
well, we've got the parking strategy. That's another grant-funded project that we'll be doing through SCAG, and so, that we'll be looking at I mean, it's a citywide study, but there will be a downtown emphasis, as I think we did the scope on that, so I think we had modified that. So, yeah, so that will begin to also lead in. And remember, when we did our discussion on the general plan, we talked about certain road treatments specifically for Sixth Street, which was slowing it down,
Yes.
creating more pedestrian, opportunities, making it safer. But what that means is what's currently, quote, more efficient is going to become less efficient, which is going to push traffic out to Pennsylvania, up to Oak Valley Parkway and Brookside, other areas. Because right now it's a lot more efficient just to shoot up Sixth Street and then hit I-10, as you get through the west side of downtown. So, that will be the net effect. So there will definitely be other roadway needs and capacity issues are going to crop up either through signalization or physical modifications of those roadway sections. So there's going to be some costs associated with that, for sure.
I-10?
I-10.
The 10.
Which one is it? It's International Highway. It belongs to a lot of people.
One more, oh, can I?
Yeah, sure, I was going to move to adjourn. but
Oh,
go
wait,
ahead.
no, hold on, I mean, because, no, because, he mentioned about the, the communication, all the utilities and everything. Is it pre-planned already that when we do the, Beaumont Avenue, there will be a conduit in there? And I don't want to see that, we put the, all the new reconstruction road in there and then we're digging. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I put the conduit for communications, other utilities in there.
Yeah, we reached out to all utility companies prior to even releasing this, so there's been coordinated effort. I think that in itself may not be enough, and that would be more reason to move forward with this payment moratorium. I think even with the moratorium, you still may get some people to come through, so we make it restrictive enough that, if they do come in and have to make these cuts under whatever circumstances, that the rehabilitation they do after they leave is essentially putting us back to, prior shape.
Yeah, I like to see the communication conduit on that side.
So,
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, real quick, would you expect that moratorium to come with then patching standards as well, or no?
Yeah, and so we would have, right, pretty much we would push for a moratorium, and I think the duration was 3 to 5 years. The longer the better, but we want to be realistic as well. But we would be looking at, should whatever excavation and trench needed to be done is, full lane paving and, certain durations. We would quantify what the restorative effort would be if they had to get in there under this moratorium.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
And better trench repair. I mean,
Right,
there are
exactly.
Certainly things that we can require, like flowable fill and things like that, that will keep you from having those trench failures. But, back to Councilmember Santos, we typically don't put the conduit in for dry utilities or communications. Whatever we would put in would be wrong.
Okay.
And so, and it would be costly,
Yes.
to your road project. And so, once we have a moratorium in effect, that prompts those guys to really come in when they get the letter. And we'll make sure that if that's something that the council chooses to do, that first that notification gets out so they understand. It's amazing how much that can wake people up. And then, again, as they come in, it would be required, they can do the cost analysis. But if we went out and put 2 4-inch conduits, they would want 3 tubes. I mean, it would just be wrong, whatever we do. And so, I think the moratorium is probably a better solution.
We'll use polymers.
You want to add to
Yes,
this?
polymers to avoid running into pressure.
I know, I'm already there. So, how are you doing? Do you got direction?
We are good.
Are we good? Any last minute pertinent comments? No? Good?
I second that motion.
Okay, so we're good for everyone?
Thank you.
Okay, as long as you have direction, I
Thank you,
will
sir.
adjourn 8 o'clock sharp.